My name is Nick Black. I am the Managing Director of the Boston Waterfront Initiative at the Trustees of Reservations. Who here has heard of the Trustees as an organization? Good. Any members? Awesome. Thank you for being a member. For those of you who may not know or be as familiar with our organization, we are a land conservation nonprofit here in Massachusetts. We are, in fact, America's oldest land conservation organization, over 127 years old, founded in 1891 by Charles Eliot, who was a protege of the Frederick Law Olmsted. We have owned, operate, and protect through conservation restriction over 118 different properties across the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Everything from Cranes Beach up in Ipswich, World's End, down in Hingham. Has anyone seen the movie Little Women yet?
Yeah.
You like it? Several of the scenes of that movie were filmed in historic residences that are owned and protected by the trustees. We were very excited to be involved in that process. In the city of Boston, we have a presence in 53 different community gardens all across the city, as well as the kitchen at the public market. Do a bunch of programming efforts there. The reason why I'm here tonight is because I wanted to talk to you about our Boston Waterfront Initiative. This is something that we've been working on for about 4 years now, where we are seeking to establish a greater presence and create an expanded bit of open space along Boston's waterfront. There's little opportunity in the traditional way that the trustees normally acquire places to protect, and that they've been handed down from the family that's been, managing a property for many, many years. And with the development pressures that are occurring along the waterfront, we do see limited opportunities to actually create really fantastic world-class open space. And so that's why we're here tonight to talk about this opportunity. For the last few years, we've been looking around the harbor to see where there might be places that we could create world-class open space that is open to the public, inviting and engaging through its design and its programming, as well offers some protection through climate resilience, both in its design and then how it protects the neighborhoods behind it. And then finally is financially feasible in how it works these places. We spent a lot of time looking at different opportunities around the harbor. Spent a good deal of time over in East Boston talking with Massport. They're, as you may know, expanding the Pierce Park area over in East Boston. And we've responded to request proposals that they put out some time ago and are excited about the opportunities there. We've also spent a good deal of time looking at a spot in the seaport in the South Boston waterfront known as the Dry Dock. As well, the 4-Point Channel is undergoing a number of different design updates and changes there, expansions for open space. But specifically here in the North End, as you all will recall, probably about 2 years ago, we had a series of storms that caused a whole bunch of flooding up and down the downtown area, as well as here in the neighborhood. And coming out of that, the mayor and the city began to put together some ideas for what we could do to protect the city of Boston going forward from that type of sea level rise, storm surge, so on and so forth. So we were fortunate enough to work with the mayor's office and helping them to develop their resilient Boston Harbor vision that the mayor put out. We were also surprised by some of the things that they included in there. One of them was the idea of converting the parking lot in or at Sargent Wharf into a resilient green open space, which is an idea that seemed interesting to us, and it seemed to fit in with some of the criteria that we were applying to some of our other sites that we've been looking at. So we did begin to have some conversations with the city, specifically the Boston Planning and Development Agency. They're the ones who own that lot, to see what the opportunity might be. As you might know, that's a lot where there's a good deal of daily parkers that generates a bit of revenue for the BPDA, but they also seem to recognize that there is a bit of an issue with the flooding at that location. And so we decided coming into this year that it was worth opening up the conversation really to the public and understanding what people thought of this idea and gauge the interest level in terms of what it would be, or what it would take to create some public open space on the waterfront at that particular location, and whether or not that was something that folks were interested in, or if it was not something people were interested in. So that's really why we're here tonight. I would love to just kind of open this up to discussion, take some questions and suggestions, and hear people's thoughts. We're really kind of at the beginning of this process with this particular location. So we don't have any like designs or anything, but we think that it's a really great opportunity to create additional open space in the north end. You already have a fantastic series of parks, everything from the Greenway to Christopher Columbus, down to Lango, Popolo. This is, I think, a really unique opportunity sort of sitting right in the middle of that. So with that, I would love to just open it up to questions or thoughts anyone might have and go from there. Go, Paul.
So we haven't learned much tonight about the proposed very little, except that parking lot will become an urban park. Is it the entire parking lot or a portion of it?
Well, the first thing I'll say is that I don't really have a proposal. This is kind of a conversation and an idea. That would certainly be one option, to turn the entire thing into a park. Whether there's a combination of park and parking, also particularly an option. We're really sort of in the ideas phase. We want to hear what people want to see there, what is really the highest and best use for the parcel.
But you mentioned that the DRA, or the city, sorry, the city has resiliency plans for that area, including open space. So I wonder how far it's too bad the DRA's representative isn't here to discuss those resiliency plans for that area. Are you familiar at all with how the park will provide resiliency?
Well, so the inclusion of the resilience, or of the park in the resilience vision, was really just that. It was a vision that the mayor put out. It was the idea that we need to find a way to protect the shoreline, and through a combination of green space and seawalls and other things. The resilience measures itself that we would be looking to help create, one of the things that we look towards for inspiration are some of the other parks that have been built around the country. We've done a lot of work with Michael Van Valkenburg, who's a landscape architect, who created Brooklyn Bridge Park, as well as Martin's Park that they just opened up. And we learned a lot from Brooklyn Bridge Park and what they went through following Hurricane, the Superstorm Sandy. In terms of, when we talk about resilience, we kind of think about it in two ways. One of them is obviously protecting the neighborhoods behind it and stopping any sort of flooding based upon the elevation that is determined, projected through some of the climate models that exist currently. And the other way that we think about resilience is how you actually build the facility itself. And that's through the plantings, the benches, everything that works in connection with the harbor and can withstand salt water and things like that. And so, looking at more natural edges, not seawalls, but more riprap edges, looking at things like salt marshes and eelgrass beds to help protect and absorb some of that incoming water when it's there. But when it's not, it's actually a very pleasant place to be, a really nice place to be on a sunny day, which we do fortunately get some of around here. So, in terms of the city's resilience measures, I don't actually have a extensive understanding of what their plans are. I think we're going to learn more about those when they come out with their climate ready plan for the downtown and north end section of town. For those of you who might be familiar, the city has done a bunch of climate ready studies on a neighborhood basis. I would have thought they would have presented those by now, because I know they've been working on them for a while, but I think those will probably happen sometime soon. But I will just say, we ourselves as trustees aren't climate scientists, and so what we would be looking to build would be to the specifications that are outlined in the city's projections plans in terms of like how tall the elevation needs to be to maintain it.
So as I understand, the trustees, they acquire property and quite often it's donated or there's some sort of donation, not necessarily value of the property. So how would this work? Is the city going to be giving you the property to manage, or are you just working with the city? Are they?
I think those are all details to be determined and how that comes together. I think to change the use of the parcel, the city would have to put out a request for proposals in terms of how they actually are thinking about using that, which is, I think, an opportunity for everyone in here to get engaged and participate in the sort of process.
So you would be one of the parties submitting the proposal, so if you come up with a very good plan and everyone's happy with this, the city's more likely to work with you.
That's correct. Yeah, it would be a public
Developer.
process. Yeah, exactly. Go ahead.
You mentioned that the Sargent's Wharf parking lot contributes some revenue to the BPDA. It actually is the second largest continuous revenue source for the BPDA. It's a huge revenue source for the BPDA. Considering that, and the fact that Sargent's Wharf is one of the few parcels in the north end that can be built to 75 feet, what reassurances can you give us that we're not just having a purely theoretical discussion, because the city has every motivation in the world to A, continue a parking lot use, or B, develop to 75 feet?
I would love to give you every assurance in the world that we're not having a theoretical conversation, but I'm not. To be honest, I don't know that we aren't.
And it's good to have theoretical conversations.
Exactly, and that's kind of why we're here, because I think for us, our approach, we didn't want to come to you with this plan that we'd all thought through and figured out and said, this is the plan, here's what we're going to do. We wanted to start this conversation early in the process to say, what are people's thoughts, what are your concerns, what are your objections, and work with the community to actually develop a plan together. So if this is something that the community wants to do, I'm going to need all of these people in this room to support that and voice that to the city. Because otherwise, I think you're absolutely right. There's
And a whole lot of cash.
well, that's true too. But that's fortunately one of the things that, as an organization as old as ours, is we actually somewhat routinely actually put together capital raises in the amounts that would be required to actually build out something like that. And so that's something that we would be taking on is the actual fundraising piece of this. We want it to be as broad an effort as possible, but that's certainly a piece of it.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you, Tom Schiavone. The discussions with the BRA, the owner of the property, has there been any reference to the fact that not only is that lot buildable, but that was specifically set aside in a master plan from the 60s for affordable housing for the north end? Has there been any discussion as to, whether they would be willing then to allow the north end to have another parcel to put in affordable housing, such as we have another parcel up near the nursing home? So my question is, and it's really a commentary, we've watched our neighbors leave the north end. There's been massive displacement and gentrification and affordable housing. So how can the BRA so blithely talk about putting in parkland without also dealing with the fact that that is part of our legacy, that we expected to be able to have affordable housing there? Has there been any mention of that whatsoever by the owner, by the BRA?
So I'm aware of that fact, and to be clear, I don't speak for the BRA or the BPDA, actually.
Well, actually, it's the BRA because their charter, when they pass papers for real estate, they actually write the Boston Redevelopment Authority in their notes. So those of us who have been here a long time,
Sure.
Near and dear to us, it's the BRA. Just
Right.
thank you.
I mean, and that's part of this conversation is what goes there. Is this a full park? Is there an opportunity to build housing in a park together? We aren't housing developers, but if there's a partnership to be had and there's support from the community to move in that direction, again, that's part of this process to talk through what people want to see there and understand how we can work together to create something that serves the entire community. Whether or not housing goes there, that's probably not going to be up to me. I'm a guy who works on parks and wants to see as much open, green, resilient space as we can get. And if the opportunity is one that the folks in the North End want to see move forward, that's wonderful.
The last comment, it would be a shame if inadvertently the trustees of reservations stepped into a hornet's nest. I think the issue of the affordable housing really has to be transparently addressed.
Right. Well, and thank you for that. And I think that is a point very well taken. And I think that the affordable housing is an issue that's being raised in all of the neighborhoods across the city. So, I think that's definitely something worth considering. Did you have a question?
Yes, how many spots are currently, parking spots are there?
252.
Where are they gonna go? They're not daily. Steady monthly there.
Well, and that's.
I live in that neighborhood, and I'm one of them.
Okay. How many people actually do park there? I was actually curious about this.
How many what?
Does anyone else here park at Sargent's Wharf?
Many of my neighbors do.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. That's one of the questions that we'll have to work out, is where.
So you're gonna eliminate 215 spots? It's already a premium. Where was that going?
That, I mean,
Yeah, is there a way to put parking below grade?
potentially, yeah. I mean, if you look at the post office square model of putting parks, or putting the parking under the park, that's certainly something that is, we can entertain. Sure.
So my name's Jim Ray. I actually live across the street from the Sargent's Wharf lot, so I definitely have a vested interest. But I must say that having buildings right on the water's edge, which was proposed for the hotel at Lewis Wharf, whether those buildings consist of a hotel or provide hotel space or housing space, luxury condominiums or affordable housing, it still walls off the view of the harbor from the thousands or millions of people who walk along the water every day. Well, not millions every day, but certainly thousands, millions every year. And I think that would be an enormous mistake. And the post office square model that you just talked about, I think is a wonderful model. And then as most people here probably remember, there was a hideous concrete 5-story parking garage there, and now it's one of the most beautiful spaces in the city. So if you could do something like that would be marvelous, I think.
Sir?
I live right around the corner from Sargent's, and I think it would be a great idea. I walk that park, I walk that area all the time. Many people sit there and walk there all the time. I think it would be a fabulous idea to open it up and have it be a community park.
My name is Dave Roderick from the North End, and as we all know here, that we had always been promised to have parcel 6 and parcel 12 covered with a park. As part of the mitigation and part of the big dig. And have you been ever dealing with, say, the developers for Government Center that the parcel 6 is right in front, or talk with the state?
No, not directly.
Because money was supposed to have been put aside for those parcel covers. And the politicians kept saying it was appropriated, but that didn't mean anything because they'll never. And so all these years now, parcel 6 is an ugly open pit in front of the North End. And so we should be pushing for that to have a park, and also parcel 12. Because those two affect the North End directly. So your coalition, if you could start to be pushing for that, to let the state not just pretend it never existed. They made promises, and of course, they think we have amnesia.
Or clearly not.
I can speak super briefly just for 6 and 12 because I think those would be kind of under, because those are in the original Greenway design.
Yeah.
So we definitely greatly appreciate that folks here are still interested
Never
in
goes
advocating,
away.
and like we would love to continue to hear that. So 12 and 6 and 2, which as many of you may know is under a current redevelopment through a partnership with MassDOT, the VRA and the Conservancy. So parcel 2 will be redone this year, but we are definitely still advocating for 6 and 12. So I think those would be less kind of open for something like the trustees because those are under our original agreement.
But like I say, besides the state, you should be nailing the developers, because Government Center, why build a nice new hotel and then be looking out the windows at an armpit? It doesn't make any sense.
That's an excellent point. In the back, sorry.
I would love to support your proposal for a park. I think just walking along Sargent's Wharf, it's incredibly beautiful to be able to see the harbor up front. I love that you also mentioned natural materials like seagrass and grass. As most people here know, Pupilo Park is under a huge renovation, and there will be no grass. It's going to be artificial turf, which frankly, it came out after the city talked about the climate change issues, and now they're putting in plastic grass that's going to raise the temperature of the surface of the playing field. So to put in artificial grass at the water's edge seems like a real big mistake. So I just want to voice that.
Certainly agree with that. Sir?
In conjunction with your study at Sargent's Wharf, what about Lewis Wharf right next door with all that open space in the back where they proposed the hotel? Isn't part of that open space developable for parks?
The Lewis Wharf, I believe, is a privately owned.
All the way out, the piers and everything?
Yeah. So. And one of the reasons, in all the places that I talked about before, the Piers Park, the Dry Dock, Four-Point Channel, well, not Four-Point Channel, that's a whole other mess. We've really largely focused on parcels that were owned by either the city or the state, just because we don't have the funds to make a purchase of private.
But won't they be subject to Chapter 91 on construction on the water's edge?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and the benefit of building a park on the water's edge is the whole thing is Chapter 91. So we would certainly be additive there. Yes, ma'am.
I was wondering what's directly under Sargent's Wharf, in terms of, was it real land or was it filled? Has anybody explored under it?
So we haven't done any sort of an extensive geotechnical survey where we actually drill the borings in to see what's in there, like we've done in a few other places. My understanding is that it is fill. My understanding is that it also is kind of old fill, which is a lower grade in quality than what they use now. So that's, yeah, my understanding, all of that area was tideland that has been filled in. So does that answer the question?
More or less. And I guess I want to add that everybody wants to see green, but there's so many competing interests here, and we have had so many problems with idealistic, wonderful plans, and then the BRA comes and tells us exactly how it's going to be, okay? Because long before we ever were said hello to, the decision was made somewhere else. So I hope that you will be aware that this has been my personal experience here over several years. And it worries me a great deal. It would be great to have a park. I mean, who would rather have a park? But that parking, those people, you know where they're going to park if they can't park in that parking lot? They're going to park across the few driveways we have. They're going to park across the crosswalks. Along, if they can get by the Uber cars that are there already. Tiny area. And if one piece is taken away, I'm not advocating against people. It's that the reality is when you take away one piece, you're going to have that group seeking alternatives that we don't find very pleasant. And so I just hope you'll integrate everybody in the discourse, because otherwise it would just be a pitiful loss of your talents.
Right. Well, I appreciate that, and I think, again, why I'm here tonight, to sort of start to hear some of these ideas. I mean, I was told right off that the parking was going to be an issue for people, and which I understand. I hear you. There's no place else to park. So, but let's work together. Let's think through what can actually happen, and what we can build, and how we figure that piece out. I mean, the downside is that the parking lot as it exists now already floods like pretty regularly, quite a bit. And so, and unfortunately, all the data that we've seen is that it's going to get much worse before it gets much better. And so, you know, figuring out how we address that is going to be important. So, particularly in, you know, the coming future. Maybe not next year, maybe not the year after, but in 10 years for sure, definitely in 20 years. Sir?
A follow-up when you just said about how those areas flood out all the time.
Yeah.
Maybe it would be kind of radical, but in the future, what about like what they did in New York where there was that elevated railroad and then they turned it into a park? And it's above everything, so it's never going to get flooded.
Well, so the High Line is an interesting piece of inspiration for us because that was a rail line that existed and was actually set to be torn down. But it's an excellent example of an industrial reuse project. And all of the other projects that we're currently working on are derelict pieces of infrastructure that are no longer used. And so there isn't this competing interest per se. But given the pressures of the climate change issues, as well as, you know, some of the other issues that have been raised, there does appear to be an opportunity to at least have a conversation about what could happen here. And so that's why we're, you know, hoping to start this conversation a little bit. And why I'm glad to talk to everyone here.
Yeah, I think one other thing, I'm Sean Sanger in the North End as well. I think one other piece that's really interesting to me, I hang out there a lot, to be honest. That is the one location that I know of on the waterfront you can actually get down in the water. There's a lot of people that take their dogs down there, they'll throw balls out into the water, the dogs will run out there. On that slope granite, you can actually walk down there, you can get into the water. Most of our edge is all seawalls all the way around the edge. So I know the seagrasses sound really resilient, really sexy, and it sounds like it's the answer, but I would hope within the overall design, somewhere along the lines, if it's there, we find somewhere else, that we still have the ability to get to the water, touch the water, and experience the water, as opposed to purely just seeing it from the edge and kind of being up high above it. It's really nice to have that space that you can get down to the water.
Right, and thank you for that point. And I think that's one thing that we are really sort of driven by in this project, not only at the opportunity here in Sargent, but in the other places that we talked about, is that we've spent so much money cleaning up the harbor, and we've, you know, built out this wonderful harbor walk that takes you right up to the edge of it, but there's just so few places you can actually get down into the water. And so I think the sort of ethos behind the designs that we'd be looking to build are ones of access that actually provide that access to the waterfront. In East Boston, in the North End, in the South Boston waterfront, all of these different places to really do just that. And so the sort of next phase in all of this, if we, you know, can cobble together a group of folks who think this is a good idea, is to talk through what we want to see there. And so the resilient designs are great in some places, but, you know, there might be other competing uses that people want to see in a park itself. I mean, I think this neighborhood's pretty lucky in terms of having a gorgeous park at Christopher Columbus, a nice wide open space, and then also having the ball fields there in Langone and Buffalo. So the pressures of use are not as immediate as they are in some other neighborhoods where, you know, everyone's jockeying for a ball field or something like that. But, you know, we'll want to have a pretty open and engaging community process as well that talks about the design and the programming of what happens here. That, you know, gives people a reason to come, because, you know, you build a nice park but don't give people a reason to come there, then what's the point?
There's been a guy with his hand up in the back.
Oh, sure, go ahead.
I'm just wondering, you mentioned the other projects, the East Boston and Seaport. Would you be looking to do all three, or is it one or the other?
So the vision for the Waterfront Initiative is to build out a network of green open space along Boston Harbor. There are probably going to be a number of different things happening at different times, and, you know, seeing how these things sequence and line up is going to be a big part of that. But the short answer is, you know, we want to build as much as we can, and, you know, building one park would be great, but we think there's a real great opportunity to really build a network along the harbor front to really start to begin to connect some of these neighborhoods together in a unique way. And one of the things you talk about at the end of Sargent's Wharf, where you can get the dog in the water, there's also a little water taxi dock there. You know, what do we do about water transportation? And is there a way to maybe even potentially expand water transportation access there? Or link together East Boston and the North End in a very, you know, quick way across the water. Those are all things that we're thinking about and talking about. We'd love to hear other thoughts and ideas. Yes, ma'am.
Ann Moritz, and I'm just a few steps down from Sargent's Wharf on Atlantic Avenue. I've been hearing the word park maybe 40 or 50 times during this discussion, and at the same time I'm holding an image in the back of my mind of Martin's Park, and a very loving image of Martin's Park. It's also an example that I think is worth viewing for those who haven't been there, of what park means now when we talk about resiliency and the height that's involved to make it effective. It's awfully good to see what they did and what was needed to call it resilient, because I think when we say park now, that's a part of what it's coming to.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that we're really focused on is the world-class design aspect of this. We're not looking to just build a flat piece of grass, which is great to have the dogs run around in, but someplace that's actually unique and is really draws you in and has that engaging feeling that invites you to come down to the waterfront and is a nice respite and escape from the city. I mean, that's the entirety of why the Trustees was founded 127 years ago, is to provide escape and respite from the bustle of the city. So that's really kind of sits right at the core of what we're trying to do, and I really appreciate the point that you're making there. And Michael and his team did fantastic work over there. It's a very fun place because, of course, it was Martin's Park and they wanted it for kids. Is that the type of facilities that you would like to see at Sargent's Wharf? Maybe. Maybe there's some more pristine or calm elements. All of these different things we want to talk about and get input on and talk about the best use. If this is the direction that people want to see it go. Yes, sir.
Yeah, talk about cleaning up the harbor. Beautiful fishing there. How about a fishing pier?
I love it.
Fishing pier. There's no place to fish offshore. There used to be one that guys used to fish out near North Washington, the bridge. So that'd be a great attraction. Fishing in the middle of the city.
What if we put a little table with some running water to it, to where you could actually clean the fish right there?
Yeah, sure.
Like that.
Another point is that you asked for objections. The only objections I can see for a park would be developers and real estate people and the BRA.
Well, it's interesting because I think this is something that is going to have to be supported and driven by the community without question. It's got to be something that folks really want to see happen. There are going to be competing interests, and the housing question is a good one, and one that is really worth examining and considering. What are the options for housing at that location? I personally am not going to be able to build any housing. That's not what we do. But that isn't to say that that isn't the highest and best use for that parcel. And that's a conversation that this community needs to have, and one that we want to sort of help in partnership think through what is in fact possible. And so that's really the crux of this conversation is really understanding what the needs are, what the opportunities are, and then really sort of working together with a group of engaged residents like yourself. Fantastic group. This has been really fun, actually, to figure out how we move this forward. Sue.
Yes, besides the resiliency, I think if you look at any climate map in terms such as the temperatures in Boston, the North End actually is often quite hotter than some of the downtown areas. And even though we have this, the water surrounding us, we've lost all of our canopy that we've had over the years. And I think that would be most important to, the more canopy for me, the better, because it will have a cooling effect on the whole area, but also it will muffle a lot of the sounds that, you can't often get away from in the city. And there's something that's great about how trees can muffle sounds.
Right. Yeah, couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I think that's certainly one of the approaches that we would like to take. If, like Martin's Park is a great example where they brought in a lot of mature trees and really built a place that felt like it's been there for a long time. It doesn't feel brand new the way it was designed and put together. And so, yeah, no, I think you're right. There's certainly an opportunity to bring some more natural ecology from the coast right into the middle of the North End.
For stewardship, will the Parks Department eventually have jurisdiction to maintain it, or does the trustees of reservation anticipate that it will continue to have a stake? And secondly, the financing, are the trustees expected to do the raising the revenue foundational donations, or the city's capital plan? How do you see all that jiving?
So on the stewardship question, I mean, the stewardship piece is one of the things that we pride ourselves most on as an organization, and so I think that's something that we'd be looking to maintain and take care of this place. You know, this is not something we want to build and sort of put on the books of the Parks Department and make them maintain it. It's something that we would work to maintain ourselves. As for the capital piece of this will only happen if we are able to raise the money to do that. And we feel like there's a path to do that, but this is not something that's going to be dependent upon the city's capital budget.
But if the city is planning for resiliency, it seems to me they would need to certainly use some city funding or federal or state infusions in order to really make this, if not just the park, but the resiliency but the entire weight of financing is going to be put onto the trustees. Is that?
That's what we would anticipate largely. I mean, in terms of the broader resiliency measures and how the city pays for that, you know, that's a little bit out of our scope of what we're looking to do. But what we are able to do is take some of the data that's been gathered by the scientists from the Woods Hole group and the others who are working on the climate stuff and apply it to our work. And so, you know, making sure that any of the edges that we're building are, you know, 14 feet above mean high tide to, you know, stop the inflow of water. So we'll actually know what the city's target elevations are that we can design to. But as to whether or not the city will be able to chip in money, you know, we welcome it for sure. We'd love to see that, but I don't know that we necessarily want to depend upon that for this particular project.
What's next steps in this process for your organization?
Thank you. Excellent question. So we're going to continue this community conversation. Is really our next step. So I'm basically going to be doing the same thing next Monday at the North End Neighborhood Council, and then from there, what we'll hope to do probably either by the end of the month, maybe the beginning of February, is to host our own similar style community meeting. We'll just invite everyone from the neighborhood. I mean, this is obviously a very engaged group and a great place to start, but we also want to expand it, do the conversation a little bit more, hear from other people who may not necessarily be a part of this group. And so working through those channels is kind of continuing this conversation. And then from there, I think if we see and feel like there is enough support for this type of a project, you know, we'll report that back to BPDA, and they'll have to decide what they want to do, whether or not this is something that they want to actually pursue, or if, you know, like was pointed out, you know, it's a big stream of revenue for them. If it's not something they want to address at this point, you know, that we'll have to cross that bridge. But I think if we can show enough support for something like this, it's definitely possible, potentially possible. We'll see. Hopefully it's not all theoretical. A couple things I will say to kind of keep tabs on information. So we do have a website that you guys can check out. It's called onewaterfront.thetrustees.org. And my colleague Amy Nation back there, she's my project manager. You can talk to her. She's got some little handouts. We also have a blog that we update regularly with news and information about our project that you can sign up for updates. As part of the community meeting that we'll be looking to have, we'll be doing some community surveys and actually asking for feedback and having people weigh in on all of these different questions about housing, about parking, about mixed use, about, you know, how this all comes together, so we can kind of put together a much better understanding. If there are other people in this room who are interested in helping out, one of the things I think we'll be looking to do is put together a small task force of residents. So if that is something that you'd be interested in participating in, we'd love to talk to you afterwards. You can talk to myself or Amy, and we'd love to get your information and start to move that forward. But this will be a long process. I think it's probably one that will take some time to move forward. But given how everything else is coming together in the city, both in terms from a climate resilience perspective, the mayor's support and interest in creating as much resilient open spaces as possible. This is something that we do feel is possible if it is something that the community wants to pursue. So,
Thank you.
with that, thank you.